um, so we're talking about fear in the future. And to start with that, let's start with just a small little fear, the fear of death. Hardly affects most of us, huh? The hard part about something like that is that you can have either a good relationship or a bad relationship to that fear. And the tough part is it's not like fear is unwarranted, right? Part of it is just the unknown. Part of it is the uncontrollable. Part of it is the struggle with what do I do in the midst of all this. But how do we turn it into something that is a positive and maybe even a growth activity for us rather than that which is paralyzing? Because to be frank, fear takes on a number of different forms, all the way from anxiety and respect for the situation, all the way to horror about that situation, from apprehension and caution to mania and paralyzation. The question is, what do we do with that fear? So how many have at least one fear about the future in some way or another? Who wants to share at least one of those fears? What is it that you're fearful of right now?
I'm fearful of a time in which I'm not able to take care of myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is an important fear to think about.
Yeah.
Right? And it go on that spectrum. It could paralyze you, right? Make us do nothing, or it could prepare you so that what you do is the right thing.
Yeah.
The rest of you?
Mine's similar. I've had a variety of smaller medical issues with my foot and my hand and my arm in recent months, and it's just the whole, your body's going downhill, and it's probably not going to go uphill very much, you know.
Yeah.
So it's that same kind of thing of just how do you deal with the things that you have to deal with?
Yeah. And the hard part is at some point in your life, you make that transition from most of the news you receive is basically positive to where increasingly, you're right, it's the downhill type of news. And it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad news, but it does feel like it in the moment. And you have to realize that that's kind of the nature of what's going on. My body will not be as strong tomorrow as it was yesterday in some way or another. And you have to figure out how to react to life very differently. Now, most of you, I'm just looking around the screen, most of you probably haven't topped off over that yet. You're probably on the upward side, the everything's going better side of it. But there's a couple of you. And we have to deal with that, don't we?
Yeah.
And it carries inherent fears. So let me share with you the 5 remembrances, because in many ways that's what this is about, is about those 5 remembrances. So it says, oops, come on, there we go. I don't know what just happened there. Sorry about that. I am of a nature to grow old. I cannot escape growing old. I am of a nature to have ill health. I cannot escape having ill health. I am of a nature to die. I cannot escape death. All that is dear to me, everything that I love, everyone I love are of a nature to change. There is no escape from being separated from them. I inherit the results of my acts of body, speech, and mind. My actions are my continuation. Now, the first 4 of those sound kind of pessimistic, or could be used pessimistically. They're not meant to be. They're meant to be statements of life. How many have fought against those statements at one point or another in your life? Or continue to fight against them? At least part of what he is saying in all this is just true. We grow old, we have ill health, we die. Those that we are with we have separation from them, right? If you look back through your life, have any of those been not true about the people you know around you? It's just the truth about us. But how many have spent quite a bit of time fighting against those truths?
Or just being oblivious to them,
Being
just
oblivious
oblivious.
to them. That's absolutely right. But knowing and having a good relationship to those things, I think, is a lot of what fear in the future, fear and the future is about. Do we recognize just the truth of what's there? And do what we can. And I should go back to that because I think the fifth remembrance is the turning point of them all. Okay? I inherit the results of my acts of body, speech, and mind. My actions are my continuation. It's not that all this happens. It's what do we do as that is happening to us. As my body grows older, as I lose someone that I love, as Robbie moves to California, how do we allow all of that to give us actions of strength and of continuance rather than the opposite? It's what we do with our fear more than how we fear. I think the hard part is that we often feel a need to protect ourselves, right? And isn't that the very definition of fear? We protect ourselves in one way or another. The question is do we do it in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way? I have friends of mine that say something like this: I'm going to buy a gun to protect myself so I'm not afraid. Well, buying a gun to protect yourself doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you've maybe done something to put fear in a different relationship to you. But it may not be a healthy one. Are you holding that gun or are you grasping it as if it's going to make death not happen? Okay? All the things that we do, is it helping us to have a healthy relationship to the future or an unhealthy one? So think about your life. Where is it that you have at some point or another chosen to have an unhealthy relationship to all of that health and future and death? How have you caught yourself going, that's not helping me? Yes, Margie.
Most of you probably don't know this. I have a spine fusion in my neck. I had a serious spine injury when I was in high school, and it's affected me my entire life off and on. I mean, I've been able to have a normal life, but when I was in my early 50s, it just really deteriorated and I had to have a fusion. And I was a teacher and I was not able to get back to teaching. I just was, for about 5 years after that, I was in extreme pain. I had limited range of motion. I couldn't lift things, you know, I had to really make adjustments in my life. And I went through about 5 years of just being really angry and depressed. It's like, you know, this isn't fair. You know, I'm kind of railing against everything, you know, that I couldn't live the life I'd known. And what's my purpose now? You know, my so much of who I was had to do with my identity as a teacher and my relationship with my students and the parents and all of that. And then there was just a point, there was kind of a process. There was a point where I realized that I'm in just being angry. A, I wasn't making the situation any better, but B, it was affecting the people around me, and particularly my daughter, who was in high school at the time. And I don't exactly know how I came to this, but one day I just realized, you know, she needs to have a role model of a strong woman, and I'm not being that. She deserves that. And so I kind of just turned myself around and I started reading several different books. Wayne Dyer has a book called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And I read Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra and things like that. And it just gradually helped me to shift to a place of, first of all, it was just accepting this is my life now and I need to find a purpose. And then I began a gratitude practice every morning, no matter what was going on. Fairly early in the day, I sat down and I just wrote 5 things I'm grateful for. And it completely, across the next 5 or 6 years, changed my life. And I have a wonderful relationship with my daughter now, and she's doing really well. And so I just wanted to share that.
I have to tell you that I think what you described there, Margie, which is amazing. That's exactly what we have to do. Most of us come out of at least partially very influenced by what I think of as Cold War mentality. A few more nukes will make me not afraid, right? And too much of our childhood, too much of our young adulthood was marked by that type of thinking. And so rather than dismantling fear, we build up something to protect ourselves from it. And do you notice anytime we do that, when we see something that's threatening, it often perpetuates the fear rather than alleviating it, right? It ups the stakes and causes us to escalate, because if someone is threatening us with a gun or any type of weapon, rarely do we get the same equal level weapon. We get something bigger to protect ourselves, right? Which then means that they get something bigger and we get something bigger. And do you see the escalation that happens? So rather than dismantling, we're perpetuating. We're making it so that it has larger and larger profile of threat towards us. And at least part of what we have to do is dismantle in our mind that which says a few more nukes. And yet that is so indicative of what we emerged out of, that it's hard for us not to do that. So how have you found, like what Margie said, a way to be able to step into a better relationship to all that? Sharon.
Well, you know, I'm a control freak and I really want to be in control of everything. Yeah. And I think what you're talking about the bigger nukes, the fundamentalist Christianity that I came out of kind of taught that. You know, I think one reason that people have such struggle right now letting go of that kind of thinking is because it sort of offers an in control worldview that helps with some of the fears that we have. So when I left,
come by it honestly.
Hey,
are you saying we come by it honestly?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, you know. So for me, though, my journey out of that, it was hard to give that that certainty up. You know, that there was a comfort in that.
Yes.
But through the years, I started to encounter Buddhist thought, and that, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh and other thinkers have had a huge impact on my life. And this kind of thinking, I had breast cancer in 2017. And the thing that I recognized in that experience, first of all, was, you know, this thinking, I have a nature to become ill. I think early on, you know, every woman that's had a mammogram is so relieved when she gets positive results, and so aware that many women that same day are not getting positive results, and we know the statistics. And so when I got my diagnosis, it's like my mind, because of thinking along these lines, first went to me and how many other women got this news today. You know, it's like I didn't feel like, why me? Or for some reason, my mind didn't go there at that moment. It went to, why not me? I mean, you know, statistically, it's so that was helpful. And then I also found, and anybody who's gone through hard stuff, it's kind of like when you are so out of control of something, there's a kind of peace in that. And that's what I encountered. It's like, I had breast cancer. I had to do the next thing and then do the next thing and make the next decision and go through all of that. And it was totally, I had no say, you know, in what the outcome was going to be. I was very fortunate. I had a good outcome. But there's some kind of peace about being in that space where you just recognize that we really ultimately are out of control. And so that encourages me to try to approach things that way. Although I have to say, I just learned yesterday that I have to have a root canal on Thursday, and I've never had one. And I am like freaked out. This process is holding.
Whether or not your dentist does a good job with that, it is still a fear-invoking space, isn't it?
So, anyway, that's my story. So.
And I think part of that, like with the root canal, fear is an okay emotion to feel. It depends on our relationship to that fear that we have to figure out. Does it, as I move towards that future, what do I do? Because like you said, Sharon, when you get a diagnosis that you don't like, a cancer diagnosis, there's lots of ways you can face that. And at least part of that is having to trust somebody else to be able to do what you can't do by yourself. And that is outside of what we've typically done for ourselves. We've typically been in control, right? Robbie going over to be with the family in California means that she's not going to have the same type of control she has had. That's not a bad thing, but it is not going to be simple for an independent like she is.
Her family.
Right? It changes our relationship to things. So does it become something that helps or something that hurts? The choice is always ours. In the reading, it said this: most of us aren't making good use of our ability to take care of ourselves. We don't use our energy for the practice of transforming our afflictions and helping us relieve suffering in ourselves and others. What is it that we are doing, not to make it so we don't die, but so that in every moment we are doing the very best possible in the midst of whatever comes along, to make it so that we are facing it as strongly as possible. Because you can't take away necessarily the diagnosis. You can make it so that your strength in the midst of a diagnosis is either strengthened or weakened. So what are you going to do in the midst of that? If you suppress the fearful thoughts, they will just fester in the dark, as Thich Nhat Hanh says. And that's not what we want, because that will increase the sickness. What do we do to make it so that we don't let the fear grow, but that we let our strength grow in the midst of it?
The focus has to be on where your awareness goes, your energy goes, and to really focus on the positive energy, like Margie was saying. I think that's a beautiful thought.
Yeah, that's exactly right. How does our energy flow? What do we give power in our own mind? Okay? Do we focus on death in a way that we are battling death, or do we focus on how to make life happen in the midst of it? Not that we give in to death. In fact, it's in many ways it's the very opposite. We think that if we deny death, that's what's pushing death further away, and I don't think that's true. The denial of death actually makes it so death has more power over you. It's the embracing that death will happen that makes it so that life has a richness, so that we give a strength in every moment to that life. Right? So this is a moment of living, not a moment of just dying.
A number of years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was having a lot of problems with arthritis in my back and various other places in my body, and I kept having more and more of those things while I was still working. And I came to a realization that my work was keeping me from doing things that I needed to do to try to be healthier. I couldn't do water aerobics and things that I knew that was really good for my body. And my job didn't allow for that. And quite a lot of sitting, and that was not a good thing for my back. And anyway, so I decided to retire early. And as time went on, my body was not better. It didn't get better, but I could sort of deal with it, and and struggled with it. And ultimately, I decided I needed to get a workup for my back, and went to see a doc, and had x-rays done, and this determined that I had this rotary spinal scoliosis in my low back, which is degenerative. And what it meant was that there was never going to be an improvement. And it would just get worse. And it has. But there was something about knowing that, getting that diagnosis, having clarity, opened up a space of being at peace with it.
Nice.
And it's just how it is. And my clothes don't fit the way they used to, and I walk weird, and I'm misshapen, and I, tendency to be off balance often, and that's just how it is. And I remember my mom had so many of the things that I seem to have now. I didn't understand it at the time.
Yeah.
But she rarely complained. She just put one foot after the other, and from my memory of her, it gave me strength and acceptance to walk through what I was doing. And in the meantime, I was doing a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh kinds of things and meditation. But I had that one role model for this is how this is possible, to live a full and engaging life even with the pain and even with the changes that you don't like in your body. You just accept them and you go on, one foot after the other, but what's in front of you.
Thank you. That's a great lead in, Elizabeth, to the fear, to the practices that we are given for today. I've cut and paste. I've done a bit of a cut and paste here, but it's talking about feelings, and there's 4 different practices that he introduces in this part of things. And you can see the pages where they're at, 134, 135. And it's talking about how in the midst of all that stuff, whatever the diagnosis is, whatever it is that life has thrown at us that we wish we could just excise from our life, it says it's always possible to bring forth a feeling of happiness. But what he says is that, as in the breathing exercises we talked about last week, it's a matter of breathing in and out. In some ways, the good feeling breathing in, and the bad feeling breathing out, or recognizing, at least in the midst of the bad feeling. So look at what they're like. The 5th exercise is to recognize a feeling of joy. Breathing in, I feel joy. Breathing out, I know joy is there. Do you see the difference between those two? The one you have, you feel what is already present. The other is acknowledging that it's there somewhere, even if you don't feel it. Because sometimes as you come to these future spaces and you get the diagnosis, or you feel the presence of death, or you get the phone call that you don't want to have, you can't quite feel the joy, but you speak that it's there. And so you breathe in, I feel joy. You breathe out, I know joy is there. And so no matter which space you're in, you try to acknowledge both the presence and the possibility. The 7th exercise is to recognize a painful or unpleasant feeling. Breathing in, I know the painful feeling is there. Breathing out, I calm that painful feeling. You don't disassociate yourself from it, but you calm your soul in relationship to it. Right? And I think we do an awful lot of work trying to act as if it's not true. Where in reality, if we can be honest about it, it helps us to be stronger in the midst of it. The 8th exercise, did I skip one? Yeah, somewhere I missed one here. I don't know where it's at, but here's 5th,
And 7th.
7th, but 135, 130, anyway, somewhere there's 6th is gone. But there's a 6th thing, so go back to the back of your thing, you'll see it.
He skipped 6.
And release the tension in the
You didn't, he did.
breathing in, I calm my mental formations. Breathing out, breathing out, I calm my mental formations. That seems weird. That's not, I don't know what I did that's different about this, but all of these exercises are about making sure that as we're thinking about whatever it is we're facing, it is not to in any way diminish whatever the power is of what we're facing, the largeness of the difficulty of. It is about strengthening ourselves in the midst of. It's about not letting these things be the only word in the midst of them. So what is it that you today have to work to face? What in your life needs these exercises to help you? What's at least one of the fears about the future you have?
Bobby Dick has been one of my best friends for many, many years.
Yeah.
We've traveled together and worked on reconciling and education and just so many different things. St. Francis and away from St. Francis, go to plays, and just a real integral part of my life. And it's hard to imagine.
It is hard to imagine.
Hard to
It's hard to
imagine
want
go.
to imagine.
And I know there's a level of acceptance, which I have an acceptance, but I'm not resisting it. I'm just sad about it.
Yeah.
And
And that sadness is actually a good thing. It just doesn't feel like it. Because you wouldn't feel sad about Robbie Dick if she hadn't been powerful in your life.
it drives me crazy, but she's powerful and wonderful. She's unique.
And about anybody else that you have to mourn. The reason you mourn, because more people die every day than what you can mourn about. There's a bunch of people that die that you never even think about. All of us. But those special people who we have to in this moment struggle with losing them, it's because they've given us so much. And with their passing, they don't leave us because they've given us so much. Right? We just have to get from the physical, I have her in front of me, to the spiritual, I have her within me.
I thought the reading was really powerful that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of these exercises that Thich Nhat Hanh gives us are about facing them. And you can put whatever in those, acknowledging both the lack of that strength in the moment, but also acknowledging what is still there present with. Right? You can say, in this moment, I don't have joy, or in this moment, I don't have health, or in this moment, I don't have whatever it happens to be. But you can also acknowledge that, yes, I do have, that there is something that's here that's present about it, and there is possibility of it, even though. So if you're diagnosed with cancer, as Sharon said, you trust in the doctor who can bring a health that right now isn't present. That's a possibility. Yes, Ed.
I seem to work in a larger framework. Gradually, I've been shifting through my relationship to my body is that this body's not me. And currently I'm reading a book for the Friday group, Joy and Wisdom. a wife is communicating with her husband through a friend who's psychic and a medium, or he talks about how, oh, well, we're right there with you all the time. We're trying to play little tricks for you to notice us. There's no break in our connection to those that have passed to the other side. They're still actively with us. And so that's an immediate sensation. But increasingly, I don't seem to be afraid of death. It's been a growing thing over the last 40, 50 years, where it's my body that dies, but I don't.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about, Ed, is what Thich Nhat Hanh said about the Buddha. Well, let me show you this quote. It's a good quote. The Buddha often said that we should not be attached to even the foot of that tree where we'd like to sit and sleep. We should be able to sit and sleep at the foot of any tree. Our happiness should not depend on having that particular spot. We must be ready to let go.
Yeah.
It's whenever we hold on to, I can only find happiness under this tree. I can only find happiness with this particular relationship to this person. I can only find happiness if I have this to eat or that to do or whatever it happens to be. It's that our joy, our strength, our self comes from a larger thing than just that. And the more we can expand our heart beyond a particular need, the more we have that type of non-fear. And I shouldn't say, I don't think it's quite, I don't like the term. I'm not afraid of death, because I think that it diminishes. I have a different relationship to that fear of death than what I might have had before, right? And so it takes on not a negative aspect, but it takes on a positive aspect. I have respect for death. As I look at death today, that respect I have for what happens in that process, the respect I have for who has passed on in my life is very different, right? Trying to hear my dad's voice today is very different than how it was before he died 20 years ago, right? And I don't mean that just in a negative. It's a positive as well, because I can remember what I want to remember, not necessarily whatever he was trying to tell me. Right? You know what I mean? We can hold it. We can hold that death in a different way, in a better way, as we move forward. I don't have to have whatever it was that other person did that stepped on my toes. Scott.
So one thing that sort of resonates with all of the remembrances is the question of how do I focus and live my life fully, despite whatever limitations and so on. And that fifth remembrance about the inheriting the results of my acts of body, speech, and mind,
yeah.
My acts or my continuation was particularly helpful to me. And his definition of karma in Sanskrit, that it means action.
Yeah.
I'd always thought of karma as being luck or fate. And I also related that to a book that I read a long time ago called Love is Something You Do. And I don't remember the book being particularly profound or well written, but the idea that love was not a feeling or attraction, that it's an action.
Yes.
And recently, Doris and I have been, we just finished watching all the episodes of Orange is the New Black. And in that filming, the characters are continually struggling with self-preservation, acting in their own self-interest versus looking at the harm their actions do to others. And they, I think they do a great job in showing that through the inmates, the guards, the warden, the corporate executives. In all the episodes, people are continually confronted, or the characters are provided with opportunities to make new decisions. So even though they protected themselves and done some pretty bad things in the past, they get a new opportunity to do something different.
Yeah, yeah. I used to, when I was up in the Phoenix area, I would work in a program called Kaya, which went into the juvenile detention center, and essentially tried to help them to see something different than what their life before had taught, and frankly also what some of the penal system was telling them was true about them. And could we help them to be able to see a different story than all that? But I think that all of us have to figure out how to tell a different story than whatever the penal system of our life has taught us, right? Whatever it is that has set a foundation, whatever that Cold War thinking is that made it so that right now we're increasing our arsenal, right? How do we, instead of that, figure out how to plant that which is of beauty in the world instead of building one more nuclear weapon? Because we do a lot of weapon building, don't we? In a lot of different ways. And you're right, Scott, that the idea of karma is that whereby how we stand in the world, how we view the world. I'm amazed how much right now in our moment, people have chosen to say, well, let's be against China because of all this coronavirus stuff. Well, that's not going to fix coronavirus because we find an enemy in the moment, is it? There's things that we ought to do to be positive and working towards what will fix coronavirus. Both the fear that it puts in our hearts and also the fear that it's out there in the world because of it. And devising one more enemy, I think, clouds that fear. Makes it so that we see the cloud rather than truly dealing with the fear. So what's the karma of your life? What is it that you're trying to build as the foundation of how you view the world? What are some of the components, at least?
One of the things for me in this whole coronavirus situation is it's just human nature. We want to blame someone, you know? And what I'm trying to do is step back from whatever I feel about what's going on and just say, what's the loving response, you know? Instead of the fearful response or the, you know, hysterical response, or the, it's your fault, you know, China did this, or whatever, or, you know, our leaders don't have a comprehensive, you know, plan of how to deal with this. And so it's kind of a free for all. Well, that's true. But, you know, just sort of on an individual level with the people I'm in contact with, how can I be in a loving place rather than a blaming place or a fearful place or an attacking place?
Yeah. And how many of you have at least one person that easily draws you into that attacking space, that blaming space? Me too.
Yeah, I really believe that that we as individuals and the way in which we hold things really makes an impact in the world, and it's that it's the spirit, it's the strength of spirit, and that can make a difference because it helps other people. And so I've really been working at my relationship with Mr. Trump. And for me, he is the antithesis, as I look at him, of all the things that I believe in and what's valuable to me. And yet I know that there is that spark within him somewhere, that he is a child of God, just like I am. And I absolutely refuse to engage in anger and rage at him, which is what I would have done 10 years ago, and did a little bit when he was first elected. And from time to time it comes up again. But I know that that's not helpful. And I think as part of the karma that I'm creating for myself is holding people that really see things so differently and act so differently, that in a way that I don't approve of, or that I want to have happen, that I see can be dangerous. It's still, that person is a child of God, and only thing I can do is just love that spirit that's in there somewhere, and hold up the possibility that might make a difference. That's all I can do. But that's my karma. That's what I feel like I need to do in the world.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing karma. Thank you. How about the rest of you? What's your practice? Ed?
Yeah, I echo what Elizabeth, and I guess I approach Trump, who I have worked with, too, as a badly damaged child, and I recognize so much in him. If I didn't see it in him, I'd have it. Let me re-put that. If I spot it in him, I spot it in myself. I wouldn't recognize it in him if I didn't have something going on in me that was similar. And so I look at the damaged child in myself as well, as seeing it, or the reflection of it that I project out onto him. Yeah. And so I'm trying to heal myself from anger that I have, and the judgment that I'm, the quickness to point fingers and find somebody to blame. And I call it forgiveness, but it's at a different level of letting go and being compassionate, and understanding how we're all caught up in a struggle.
Some people make it really difficult to want to be compassionate, though, and so you have to choose it, right? Specifically with those people, because I look at the faces on the screen right here, and I don't have a problem at all being compassionate with you guys. But those other people,
oh yeah,
right? But that's where we really need the compassion, isn't it? Is in that arena, because it's not that my compassion for you won't help you or me, but that's not transforming compassion, is it? That's where we practice it, but not where we do our. That's not where we do our best work with the compassion. The rest of you, how are you building your karma? Yes, Doris.
One of the most helpful things I read, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, was to look at other people and make the most generous interpretation of their actions instead of the most critical. And I've used that a lot on my former son-in-law. He did a lot of damage to our older daughter in their marriage, very psychologically abusive and critical and so on. But I try to see him through a different lens. And when he does stuff, I try to see, you know, like Ed was saying, the damaged child part of him, or the part of him that might be a more generous interpretation than he's just a blah, 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 blah. And that's been really helpful to me to try to get a different perspective on people's actions.
Nice, thank you. What you're talking about, though, Doris, is you're talking about mindfulness, and this is what Thich Nhat Hanh said about this: that every time fear is embraced by mindfulness, the energy of fear decreases before going back down to the depths of our consciousness as a seed. We must tell them, my fear, my dear, I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of my fear. That's a mindful practice, whether it's with individuals or with our own emotions. It is about saying, I choose to think differently in whatever the first, easiest, most natural reaction would be. And that's a really good thing for us all to practice.
Um, Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the opportunities of this time is that we have this sort of unencumbered period where we have time to practice mindfulness and be working towards some of these things. One thing that I have loved about Buddhist thought too is that, and in these stories that Margie and Elizabeth shared, it's not like some external admonition like this is how you should think, you know. It's you kind of come to this realization in yourself, this is the path to peace, you know. This feels better, this is good for me, this is good for my karma, it's good for everybody. And to me, that's how transformation has most successfully worked for me, is when I become convinced of the wisdom of something, and then it just sort of flows, instead of being like, oh, you should think this way about Donald Trump. It's more like, or you should, be able to give up this role that you've always had, not from an external place, but from just recognizing, oh, this is a path that takes me to my peace. So in this more quiet time, it's been easier to put attention on that. A practice that is good for me is sometimes when I blow it, when I just do something incorrectly, it's like to think how I felt when I did that, like maybe I spoke in anger or whatever, and then think, okay, so what if I had handled that differently? How does that feel now to me, to my body, my spirit? And when you kind of contrast those, it's like you think, oh, okay, that's the path I want to take, but it's internally driven rather than this, admonition that's outside of you.
Yeah. But that time of mindfulness, which I think you're right, having that time to pause is a really good thing. Mm-hmm. But it can also be a scary thing if we're not prepared to let it change us, move in us, work in us. If I want to just go back to my easily known habits, simply driven actions, then that time of mindfulness can be threatening to me. And it shouldn't be, but it's easy to do that. Mary, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say something I've been working on, and I also have found daily meditations. I do a lot of guided meditations using the Insight Timer, and having a gratitude book also. But I'm going through a divorce, and I was married for 32 years. And I have some anger at my husband. And what I'm trying to do, because that doesn't feel good, is see him as the father of my children. When I see him, that's how I see him. And it makes it easier for me to be kind and compassionate. And we've also, it's hard right now as I haven't been able to really see my family. That's one of the things that's hard, because I'm in an apartment, and suddenly the coronavirus hits and you can't see your family and friends except on FaceTime or Zoom. I actually have seen my kids now that I've been able to isolate. I have seen my kids. I have seen my new grandbaby, which has been wonderful. But like I said, I'm also angry. I have anger at the administration. I have anger at my husband, and yeah, trying to look at them in a different light. It's actually easier for me to look at my husband in a different light, because I know him personally, and I know his good qualities, and I know he loves his kids. Yes, I am having a harder time with Trump, but you guys brought up some good ideas, of how to do that. But yeah, it is, I don't want to live in anger. I don't want to be bitter. I don't want to feel angry. So trying to change that to loving kindness is what I'm trying to do.
But what you're talking about, Mary, is intentionality, right? Not just being guided by whatever the emotion is of the moment, the fear of the moment, but choosing how to hold that fear.
Yes.
Right? How to, because there is fear as you divorce. There is fear as you try to figure out the new relationships of. Intentionally choosing rather than just being driven by will always be a better choice, but it is it's not the simplest choice. The simplest choice is being driven by whatever the most heightened emotion is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is often the worst of the fear or the worst of the anger or the worst of, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. How about the rest of you? How are you trying to do differently your fear? What's the karma you're trying to establish? The ground we walk on, from which we view things, the rose-colored glasses that we put on, sometimes doesn't speak the whole of the truth, but it does change our hearts as we look at that whole truth, right? There's important things that our fear of the future show us, but how we do things in relationship to that fear of the future is important. When I talked to Robbie, and she's telling me about her move to California, she goes, but at least I am registered for a ballot by mail, so I can vote in California. Because she has fear of the future. She doesn't know what's going to happen over there. She has fear of what's going to happen in the election, but she also knows she has some things that she has put in place to be able to make it so that she can do well. She's going to be with her family. She's going to have her ability to vote. She's going to continue to be much of who she is as she moves into that unknown and fearful future, right? She can't control it all. How many of you can? But she is doing what she can to be able to face it differently than what she could have. So think about some of those things that you have. And do that meditation where you breathe in, acknowledging that you have, even as you breathe out the possibility in the midst of not seeing. Right? Do those breathing exercises that allow you to sense at least a larger picture than what's right in front of you. Right? In that isolation that you're in, you breathe in that you are in connection with people. And you breathe out the possibility of larger connection that maybe you don't feel in the moment. Right? Because you don't get to call and talk to them in the same way. Right? In the midst of an election that we don't have control over completely, right? You breathe in the work that you can do, and you breathe out the possibility of what somebody else has to do, right? And that it can, between those two things, somehow bring us to the space that's better for us. Facing the fear of the future doesn't solve things. It does make us stronger in the midst of whatever happens, right? It doesn't make sure that things go our way, but it does make it so that we react to what does happen in a better way.
And what Elizabeth said earlier about, you know, we're part of the larger whole, and what if we can shift our feelings about things, that radiates throughout the universe. It really, in one way, we all share we're all fragments of one mind. And our participation in that mind is perhaps the biggest single thing that we can do in shifting the atmosphere.
That's right. That's right. Here's one last quote that Thich Nhat Hanh shared. Most of us aren't making good use of our ability to take care of ourselves. We don't use our energy for the practice of transforming our afflictions and helping us relieve suffering in others and ourselves. Our work with fear is to make it so that we are not continuing to be in a space of suffering and struggle, but instead in a space of strength, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. So as we see whatever they're struggling with, whatever they're suffering from, we can be a positive force in that moment rather than the negative. Life on a regular basis will tell us the other story. Don't believe just life. Believe the intentionality and the mindfulness that allows you to be a stronger force in the midst of it all. Okay? Thank you, guys. Next week, we will do the next 2 chapters that I sent to you, and they are about mindfulness and about fearlessness. So read those 2 chapters and enjoy the week. Thank you.
Adios. Vaya con Dios.
There you go.